Before we begin, don't forget to pray for your brothers and sisters. The ordeal continues, and we ask God to relieve them. Peace be upon you. Imagine with me a quiet summer night, specifically on June 11th, 1962. In the heart of the Pacific Ocean lies Alcatraz Prison, known as the Rock. This prison, which the whole world considers an impregnable fortress from which escape is impossible. But on that night, 3 prisoners decided to challenge the impossible. With primitive tools and a daring plan, they executed an escape that astonished the entire world. How did they manage to widen those narrow ventilation openings? How did they build a boat from simple materials? And what happened to them after they vanished into the night? Did they truly succeed in achieving the impossible and reaching safety? Or was their fate death in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay? Welcome to the story of the impossible escape from Alcatraz Prison. And before we dive into the details, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive all that's new. And let's get this video to 20,000 likes before the next one. Your support is with me. Alcatraz Prison, a legend of fear and despair. In 1934, Alcatraz Island was transformed from a military base into a maximum security federal prison. It was named the Rock due to its unique location in the heart of San Francisco's waters. This prison was designed to make escape an act of madness, which was proven by the failed escape attempts over the years. The purpose of Alcatraz was to hold America's most dangerous criminals, those whom no other prison could control. Therefore, security was extremely tight. Watchtowers and searchlights illuminated the area day and night, and guards were trained to the highest level. The corridors were filled with alarm systems, and any unusual movement was enough to mobilize the guards immediately to fill the place. But security was not limited to the land. The waters surrounding the island were an integral part of the security system. The water temperature was very cold throughout the year, in addition to the strong currents that would drag anyone who tried to swim in them. On top of all this, rumors said that shark infested these waters. Alcatraz was not just an ordinary prison, it was a symbol of fear and dread. The prisoners held there told tragic stories of the despair and terror they lived every day. The thick concrete walls, the narrow cells, the long nights, and the sound of waves crashing against the island's rocky shore. It was a place that seemed to have come out of a nightmare. For this reason, any attempt to escape from it was considered pure madness. Since its opening in 1934, many prisoners attempted to escape, but every attempt only increased the despair and frustration of any prisoner who even thought about escaping. Let me tell you about the most famous failed attempts, so you can realize how difficult it was to escape from this terrible prison. Desperate attempts and tragic ends. The first escape attempt from Alcatraz was in 1936. Joseph Bowers, a prisoner assigned to burn trash, decided on April 27th to defy everything. While working as usual, he suddenly bolted and began climbing the iron fence at the edge of the island. It was clear he was attempting to escape, and when the tower guards noticed him, they began shouting at him, ordering him to come down immediately. But Joseph did not respond. He continued to climb. At that point, the guards opened fire on him, hitting him. The injury was fatal, causing Bowers to fall from a very high altitude, resulting in severe injuries that led to his death. Bowers' story later became known as the desperate escape, illustrating the extent to which prisoners were willing to risk everything in the hope of escaping. A year later, on December 16, 1937, 2 prisoners, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, were working in the prison workshop. Over a long period, they managed to saw through the iron bars that sealed the workshop window. One day, the weather was very foggy. The fog literally covered the entire island, so they decided to escape that day. Indeed, they took advantage of the fog and began to sneak out of the prison through the workshop window. As soon as they reached the edge of the island, they jumped into the water. From that moment on, no one saw them again. But the point is that that day was not just foggy. The weather conditions were very harsh, the water currents were extremely violent, and the bitter cold was impossible for anyone to endure. Therefore, the authorities assumed they had drowned. But when their bodies did not appear, they said perhaps the currents had carried them far away. For this reason, the FBI placed their names on the list of most wanted fugitives. Approximately another year passed, and on the night of Friday, January 13, 1939, another escape attempt occurred that ended tragically. The 5 prisoners, Arthur Barker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stampville, were known as some of the most dangerous inmates in Alcatraz. They were confined in the most secure part of the entire prison. Despite this, one day they managed to escape from their cells. But while they were working, the watchtower guards noticed strange movement on the beach. As soon as they realized what was happening, they began firing at the prisoners from all directions. Arthur was fatally wounded and died instantly. Dale Stampville sustained serious injuries but survived. The remaining 3 prisoners were captured and completely isolated afterward, and their security became even tighter than before. Several years passed with some minor attempts, all of which also failed, until we reached April 14, 1943. On this day, a daring escape attempt occurred by 4 prisoners who were also working in the prison workshop: James Borman, Harold Brest, Floyd Hamilton, and Fred Hunter. The 4, while working in the workshop, pulled the same trick. They cut the iron bars on the workshop window one by one. They had also stolen 4 bags from those used for guards' clothes to use them as floats during their escape. On the night of the escape, the prisoners struck 2 guards, tied their hands and mouths, and then escaped through the window. But during the escape, one of the guards managed to free his whistle, and the other guard began to blow it. As soon as the watchtower guards heard the whistle, they began firing at the prisoners. James Borman was hit by a bullet and fell into the water, losing consciousness, but Harold Brest caught up with him and held on to him as he floated on the bag. However, when the prison boat approached them, Brest was forced to let him go, hoping he could escape. James drowned in the water, and his body was never found afterward. At the same time, Fred Hunter was wounded in his back and hands and lost hope of being able to swim, deciding to hide in a cave on the island. But after 2 hours of searching, the guards managed to find him due to the blood trails at the cave entrance. As soon as they surrounded him, he immediately surrendered and was arrested. The only one remaining after this whole story was Floyd Hamilton, whom the guards initially thought had drowned like Borman. But the truth was that Hamilton was hiding in the same cave as Hunter. However, after waiting 2 days in the cave, despair took over him, and he decided to return to the same window he had escaped from, hiding in the warehouse and being caught the very next day. In the end, James Borman paid with his life, and Brest, Hunter, and Hamilton were arrested and returned to prison once again, with harsher sentences than before. Battle of Alcatraz, when the prison became a battlefield. In 1946, specifically between May 2nd and May 4th, events occurred that later became known as the Battle of Alcatraz. A group of prisoners, namely Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Moran Thompson, attempted to escape. The 6 prisoners began their plan by taking control of the cell block area. After they had indeed overpowered the guards, they reached the armory and seized everything in it. The plan was to escape using the prison's own boat. But when they couldn't open the main outer door of the prison, they decided to confront. A battle ensued in which they managed to hold 2 prison guards hostage. After 2 days of fierce clashes, Joseph Kretzer shot the hostage he had. With the escalation of the situation and the continuation of the confrontation, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes despaired of the escape attempt and returned to their cells again. As for Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, and Marvin Hubbard, they refused to surrender. The battle was so intense that the U.S. Navy intervened. After violent confrontations, U.S. forces managed to kill the 3 prisoners. After the battle ended, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes were charged with killing prison guards. Shockley and Thompson received death sentences, while Carnes, who was only 19 years old at the time, was sentenced to life imprisonment. After that, several other attempts occurred, all of which quickly failed. All these failed attempts I've told you about demonstrate the difficulty of escaping from this prison. Every failed attempt added to the prison's reputation that escape was impossible. Sending a message to the other inmates that escape was not only impossible, but their very lives would be at stake. But all of this would change in 1962. specifically on the night of June 11th. The masterminds, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. On that quiet summer night, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin decided to execute a daring escape plan. A plan that would require great precision and meticulous execution, costing them months of preparation. Frank Morris was the mastermind, and he decided to choose the Anglin brothers because they were known for their swimming skills. Each of the three prisoners had a life story full of events that shaped his personality and made him capable of thinking about escaping from a prison that everyone considered inescapable. Frank Morris was born on September 1st, 1926. At just 11 years old, he was forced to spend his life in a Washington care home. From there, he began his life of crime at a young age. The first crime he committed was at just 13 years old, and it was the beginning of a series of crimes he committed throughout his life, from drug possession to armed robbery and car theft. Each time he was arrested, he would plan to escape from the prison he was in. This increased his notoriety in the criminal world, to the point that he was known as the smart criminal who could escape from any prison. Morris was known for his extraordinary intelligence. His IQ was 133 points in intelligence quotient tests, meaning he was in the top 2% of the world's population. He was not only intelligent, but also had an exceptional ability to plan and organize, and escaping from prisons was a game for him. His last escape was just 1 year. Before entering Alcatraz, when he managed to escape from Louisiana State Penitentiary, where he had been sentenced to 10 years for bank robbery. He remained at large for a year before being caught again while attempting another robbery. In January 1960, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz Prison in an attempt by authorities to crush his hopes of escaping. But when he arrived, he considered this challenge to be harder than the previous ones. Nothing more. He was convinced that even Alcatraz would not be able to hold him. From his first day in prison, he began to study every detail: the guards' timing, camera locations, how doors opened, every large and small detail. A year later, he received news that 2 prisoners he knew from before had been transferred with him to Alcatraz Prison: John Anglin and his brother Clarence Anglin. John Anglin was born on May 2nd, 1930, and Clarence was exactly 1 year younger. Both were born in Georgia to a family of 14 siblings, a poor family who all worked in agriculture from a young age. John and Clarence, from a young age, entered swimming races in frozen lakes and won them. But poverty led them to a life of theft and crime. It started with simple crimes like stealing chickens and crops from the fields they cultivated, until they reached bank robbery in the early 50s. Their robbery plans were always characterized by boldness and precision, to the extent that they would enter banks in broad daylight, and they never harmed anyone during the robberies. According to them, they never even carried weapons. In 1958, they spent part of their sentence in Florida State Prison. But when they tried to escape from there, they were transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, from which they also tried to escape. So they were transferred again to Atlanta Penitentiary. And when they tried to escape from Atlanta Penitentiary as well, it was said that these 2 could only be held in Alcatraz. On October 24th, 1960, John arrived at Alcatraz Prison, and immediately after, Clarence arrived on January 16, 1961. When John and Clarence arrived at Alcatraz and met Morris, whom they had known for a long time, it wasn't long before this acquaintance turned into a strong friendship, especially after they learned that he was famous for his intelligence and ability to escape from prisons. As for Morris, he saw these 2 as the perfect choice for the escape team. Morris knew their swimming skills, especially in cold water, so they would be the ones who could swim with him in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay if they succeeded in escaping from prison. While studying the prison's secrets, another inmate named Alan West overheard them. Because his cell was adjacent to Morris's cell, he contacted him and said, "I can show you an escape route, but on the condition that you take me with you." He said that his job in prison was to clean the area above the cell roofs. One day, while working, he discovered a ventilation opening that led to the roof. When Morris heard this, he felt that there was indeed real hope for escape, as he had expected. He began to use his intelligence to devise a meticulous plan to escape through this opening. After studying the building's design, he was able to determine that the small ventilation openings located under the sink in each cell were connected to passages that would lead them to the ventilation opening Allen had mentioned. But the problem was that these openings were very small, impossible for an adult, no matter how thin, to pass through. And from here began the first challenge in the most famous prison escape operation in history. Morris, with his intelligence, managed to exploit one of Alcatraz Prison's strengths to succeed in the escape. The salt water surrounding the prison made some parts of the concrete walls weaker than others. One of these walls was the area around the ventilation openings in the cells, which the prison did not regularly maintain like other exposed areas. Here, Morris felt that by using some simple tools, he could widen the openings and pass through them. But when would they dig without anyone noticing or hearing a knocking sound from outside the cell? After discussions among the four of them, they agreed that the digging time would be from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., because this was the time when prisoners were allowed to play music. The four took turns monitoring the guards' movements so that no one would notice what they were doing. After finishing, they would cover the opening with cardboard boxes the same color as the wall, and put some junk on top so that it wouldn't look like anything strange. After weeks of digging, Morris, as the mastermind, began looking for new tools to speed up the digging process. He found an old saw lying in the prison warehouse and an old vacuum cleaner that they used for cleaning. He removed the motor from it and made a primitive digging tool to help them execute the plan. At that time, many prisoners knew what was happening in Morris's cell and his friends, and some testimonies even say that 80 prisoners knew what was happening. But to get revenge on the authorities and break the myth of the impossible escape from Alcatraz, none of them reported it, nor did anyone even ask to be with them. They even covered for them. And little by little, the plan began to evolve. They made faces from soap, paper, and the dirt from the digging, and they would place them on their beds as if they were sleeping and continue digging all night. Clarence was responsible for collecting hair for these dummies as he worked in the prison barbershop. After months of digging and widening, only the most important part of the plan remained. How would they cross the bay waters and reach the nearest land without drowning or being eaten by sharks? One day, Morris found a page from a magazine called Popular Mechanics, which had an article explaining how to build a rubber boat using simple tools. From there, he got the idea of building a boat to escape with. The material they would use was the jackets or coats that prisoners wore in very cold weather. These clothes contained rubber material in their manufacturing, so over time, they managed to collect more than 50 of them. To assemble it, they stole an old sewing machine from the prison workshop. They also stole steam pipes to heat the rubber and seal the seams, in addition to some wood and nails that they took stealthily. And because Allen West worked in cleaning an area that no guards approached, he deliberately took dirt from the digging they did every day, threw it on the roof, and swept hard with the broom, so that the dirt would fall on the heads of the guards patrolling around the cells. When they started to get annoyed by this dirt, they allowed him to take 2 old blankets to cover the opening so that the dirt wouldn't fall on them while he was cleaning. This was the most important step in the escape plan, and the prison guards themselves helped them with it. The area Allen chose was the area with the ventilation opening that was the basis of the escape idea from the beginning. And because every step was calculated precisely, they were able, with the hole they dug in their cells, to reach passages that would lead them to the abandoned area. Day after day, they began to move all the equipment they had collected from the prison workshop, and they turned the place into a secret workshop in the heart of the prison. They would go to the workshop through the secret passages they had made when the guard patrols were a little quiet. And of course, they didn't forget to leave the dummies they had made on the bed so that no one would notice that they weren't there. At this stage, the plan had already begun to take its final shape, and each of them knew well the role he was playing and the role he would play in the next stage. And every day they would practice the steps they would take to ensure that they would be able to execute them quickly and without mistakes. And of course, the boat was the most important goal for them because it was their only hope of escaping from the place. So it had to be perfect. Before the fateful night, the four prisoners reviewed all the details. They tested the boat and the life preservers and began to prepare to execute the plan. At around 9 p.m., Morris, John, and Clarence were in their cells, waiting for the last guard patrol to make their routine rounds and ensure that all prisoners were in their places, so that they could begin the first step of the escape. As soon as the awaited moment arrived, they began to remove the cardboard boxes that were covering the passage openings. But Allen, on the fateful night, was unable to open the opening in his cell. The cement he had used to secure the opening had dried and hardened in a way he couldn't break. He tried with all his might, but to no avail. Morris and the Anglin brothers heard his desperate attempts, but there was no time to help. They had to move forward, and so they left Allen West behind and continued their path towards freedom. The Great Escape, Moments of Truth. After passing through the ventilation openings, the three reached the secret passages. These passages were dark and narrow, but they knew them well from months of planning. They reached the roof, where the cold winds slapped their faces. The sky was overcast, providing them with perfect cover. Quickly, they headed to the place where they had hidden their handmade boat and life preservers. They inflated the boat carefully, ensuring everything was sound. Then, in a crucial moment, they pushed the boat into the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. They jumped into the boat and began paddling vigorously, utilizing their knowledge of the currents. Every paddle stroke brought them one step closer to freedom and further away from Alcatraz's cold walls. The mystery that still surrounds the story. Since that night, Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin were never seen again. Authorities launched a wide-scale search operation, including sea and air, but to no avail. No trace of them was found, no bodies, no remnants of the boat. Authorities declared that they had drowned in the cold waters and that the strong currents had swallowed them. But many theories emerged, suggesting that they might have succeeded in escaping and living a new life under false identities. Unconfirmed reports spoke of sightings of them in various parts of the world, but none have been definitively confirmed. To this day, the story of the Alcatraz escape remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. Did they succeed in achieving the impossible? Did they live a free life after all that suffering? Or did they perish in a desperate attempt to reach freedom? This story continues to remind us that human will, even in the darkest circumstances, can defy the impossible. It is a story of hope, planning, risk, and the mystery that still surrounds the fate of three men who decided to write their own ending. And here, our story for today ends. We hope you enjoyed this exciting journey into the world of Alcatraz and its secrets. Don't forget to share the video with your friends, and we'll see you in a new story next week.